From London, this is the Standard Podcast, and I'm Mark Blunden. Coming up in this episode...
I remember it being as one of the best pieces of drama I'd seen on TV.
Yeah.
It captivated me for the whole hour. I felt deeply uncomfortable watching it. I thought it was funny at moments. I thought, wow, it's extraordinary. And the biggest question was, how on earth did that come about?
Actress Ruth Wilson discusses a very royal scandal with the Evening Standard's chief theatre critic, Nick Curtis. But first... Kamala Harris pummelled Donald Trump at their first and potentially only White House election debate, forcing the former president repeatedly onto the defensive and in the process picking up the prized endorsement from Taylor Swift. Evening Standard deputy political editor Jitendra Joshi reports Democratic Vice President Harris exploited her experience as a courtroom prosecutor to press her case against the Republican as unfit for office, while Trump angrily pushed back against his opponent's claims that he is a danger to the Constitution. So which of them came out on top after this ill-tempered confrontation at the debate in Philadelphia hosted by ABC?
We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before.
Jitendra Joshi joins us now and describes the setup and the vibe.
There was so much expectation going into this debate about the vibe, about the practicalities of things, because, as we know, this debate was only happening. Kamala Harris was only there on stage as the Democratic standard bearer because of Joe Biden's shambolic, disastrous performance in June when he went up against Trump. That saw Biden have to quit the White House race, and that's now why we're seeing Harris there. And the vibe, as always with Trump, was strained, to say the least, and everyone was kind of wondering which version of Donald Trump we would get, whether it would be the sort of vaguely unifying candidate who survived an assassination attempt and talked for a little bit then about reaching out to the country as a whole, or would it be the Trump we're more familiar with, the non-stop emitter of conspiracy theories and outright lies and unfiltered anger? It was probably more of the latter, to be honest. And in part because of what we know we're likely to get from Trump, the moderators at the ABC network had agreed with the campaigns, both of the campaigns, two interesting things. One, that there would be no studio audience to cheer or heckle. And the other rule they imposed was that when a candidate was not speaking, that their microphone would be turned off. So that's a good or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. For us as reporters, we would love to have heard Trump chuntering away in the background, but we didn't get to hear that.
What were the big issues?
Debates are about two things. Yes, they're about issues, but they're also about atmospherics. They're also about the impressions that the candidates convey to the watching audience. The issues really did crystallize over a few key themes that certainly Kamala Harris and the Democrats were keen to hammer Trump on. One, notably, is on abortion rights. A large wellspring of the support for Trump, certainly from evangelical Christians in America, is while they say they're well aware of his, shall we say, failings as a human being, they see a bigger picture at play, which is that he will protect their God-given rights on issues such as outlawing abortion. Now that's become a real election liability now for Trump. Trump pushed back by saying he was never about banning abortion as such. He just wanted it no longer to be a discussion for the federal government, but to go back to individual states to decide upon. And he claimed that he did support exemptions. Another key issue we heard a lot about last night is immigration. Now that is a strength really for Trump, given the widespread unhappiness about what is seen as uncontrolled illegal immigration across the border with Mexico. But then, even then, Trump slightly lost the plot when he started going on about a claim that's been circulating on social media and was picked up by Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, who's from Ohio. J.D. Vance amplified this claim that Haitians in one city in Ohio, Springfield, are eating the residents' cats and dogs. There's no evidence for this. City officials, as the debate moderators last night, city officials say, we haven't seen this happening and we don't know where it's coming from. Debates are about substantive issues, but they're often remembered in hindsight for moments like that where somebody says something particularly striking, particularly biting, or in this case, really just quite downright weird.
Did either candidate land any significant blows on their opponent's record on the economy?
This is a point on which the Democrats, Harris herself, are vulnerable. So she's obviously served as vice president under Joe Biden. The Biden administration, according to Trump, has let inflation reach record levels. That's not actually true. Inflation has not been at record highs, however you count that. But it's true that just like in the UK and in much of the Western world, over the last 3 or 4 years, inflation did surge, even though it's back down again. Even the economy, the US economy is doing relatively well again. For a lot of voters, there's still that pain, that residual pain they're feeling from the cost of living crisis, just like we saw in the British election in the summer. So that's something that the Republicans and Trump feel pretty confident about pressing Harris on. For herself, she's spelled out the ways in which the economy is recovering and pointed out that Trump's solution, which is a blanket tariff on all imports into the US, would just amount to a punishing sales tax that would hit every American.
And how about on foreign policy?
This was a very, very clear dividing line. So there was a very striking exchange, notably about NATO and Ukraine, where Trump was asked point blank, do you support Ukraine against Russia? And, you know, he's been very sort of lukewarm about Western support for Ukraine. His response was, I support an end to the war. I don't want people to die, which is not quite the same thing as saying, I will back Ukraine to the hill, which has been consistently the policy of not just Washington, but our own government in the UK and others in NATO. There is division on the Democratic side about Israel's war against Hamas. Kamala Harris has pledged to continue stalwart backing for Israel, but she's been also expressing some misgivings about the toll on civilians in Gaza, the toll among Palestinians. Donald Trump took that a step further and with a claim that if Harris is elected, in his words, Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. You know, that's and he also claimed that Harris hates Israel. There's nothing she said or done that would justify that, but it's a vulnerability that the Republicans are keen to exploit.
How were the post-debate snap polls looking? And what about a certain very big celebrity endorsement?
One Insta poll we saw come out on CNN said 67% of viewers had thought that Harris was the victor, and 37% only felt the same, that Trump was the victor. So that would appear to suggest the Democrats came out of it well. And interestingly, I mean, you know, these things aren't really representative. You've got to take it with a pinch of salt. But interestingly, the same poll after the Biden-Trump debate in June was the direct opposite. And in terms of the celebrity front, well, probably the biggest headline ultimately coming out of this last night was Tay-Tay. So Taylor Swift, who, you know, is fairly strongly on record as leaning towards the Democrats, but she's been keeping her powder dry this time so far. On the back of the election, she came out with a pretty powerful statement in support of Kamala Harris.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up, actress Ruth Wilson on playing journalist Emily Maitlis for the Amazon Prime take on that bombshell Prince Andrew interview. Why not hit follow on this podcast in the meantime? Give us a rating. Welcome back. Now, the Standard's chief theatre critic Nick Curtis joined Ruth Wilson to discuss a very royal scandal. The award-winning actress plays former BBC Newsnight anchor Emily Maitlis in a new dramatisation of Prince Andrew's nightmare interview about his friendship with convicted sex offender and late financier Jeffrey Epstein. Now you can hear highlights from Nick's interview and also read the full interview in the newspaper and on our website. We'll leave a link in the show's notes.
I'm Nick Curtis. I'm here at the Ham Yard Hotel with Ruth Wilson to talk about a very royal scandal on Prime Video. Hello, Ruth. How are you?
Hello, Nick. How are you?
It's always nice to see you.
It is indeed.
And very interesting to talk to you about this. In this, you play Emily Maitlis through the course of securing and then doing the interview with Prince Andrew for Newsnight. Well, how did you first get involved and what attracted you to it?
The script came to me, and I'd seen the original interview back in 2019, and I remember it being as one of the best pieces of drama I'd seen on TV.
Yeah.
It captivated me for the whole hour. I felt deeply uncomfortable watching it. I thought it was funny at moments. I thought, wow, it's extraordinary. And the biggest question was, how on earth did that come about?
Yes.
So when the screenplay came through, well, one, I've never played a public figure before, so I thought that was a challenge in itself. And Emily, I've watched many times on Newsnight, so I thought it'd be really interesting to sort of investigate and play her and be in that world of journalism. But then the interview itself was really fascinating. I thought it was a real character study could be a real character study of Andrew, actually, Prince Andrew. And reading the scripts, I was like, okay, it's not just you can't replicate that interview. It's so good, why would you bother? You don't need to. But if we can ask questions around it and reveal things outside of just the interview, that's really interesting to me. And when I read the script, I thought, oh, yeah, it's fascinating seeing how this interview came about.
Yes.
What happens, how did journalists get an interview that almost, it didn't happen a number of times.
Yes.
I liked seeing behind the curtain in Emily's world. Of course, everything Andrew's world is speculative. And also I loved the third episode, which is about the consequences of this interview.
Yes.
Did it really have the impact it hoped to have? Was it just an event piece of TV?
Right. In terms of repercussions, you mean?
Repercussions.
Nothing...
Of course, repercussions for Prince Andrew and his family, but repercussions for Emily and Newsnight. But generally, there's unresolved issues.
Yes.
It hasn't been resolved.
There's no closure.
There's no closure. There's no neat bow. There's no sort of triumph. It's still a question over it about whether he is or isn't guilty, about what's happened with the other Epstein's other victims.
Yes.
So there's lots of questions that still haven't been answered, and that's what this drama poses as well.
I see. So I read the interview you gave to Emily recently, where you talked about being possibly a royalist, and I wondered if your view of Prince Andrew or of the monarchy had changed through the course of this, or how you felt about him as well.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I sort of, it's hard to know whether you claim yourself as a royalist or not. I mean, they just exist, and that's part of what you've grown up with. It's sort of, I can't quite imagine the country without them. So, they're part and parcel of who we all are as British people.
Yes.
So it's quite hard to decide whether you're a royalist or not, because I sort of think they're just there.
They're just there.
Yeah, and so you sort of, I think what did come about for me, having done this show and working on it, was sort of how royals have become entertainment, and how news has become entertainment.
Yeah.
And we are the consumers of that. So we're complicit in how much they are entertainment in a way. And I think what we question in this show is that event, again, I keep saying about whether it actually had the impact it intended to have. Has anything changed, really? Or is it just a piece of entertainment that everyone memed about and talked about, and Pizza Express and sweating?
Not being able to sweat.
And once that becomes the story, and once Emily's interview becomes the story, perhaps the real victims of it are forgotten about, and the real story is forgotten. So I actually think I started to look at from doing the show, the relationship between royals, press, and us as the consumer. And that is so specific to this nation.
Yes.
It doesn't really exist anywhere else. And how sort of we're all reliant on each other.
Yes. And also how little the different aspects understand one another. I mean, it's extraordinary that Andrew walked into that interview, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, how did you feel about that?
Well, that's what I mean. It's the idea of like how you can be so unaware of what that... I mean, that's the biggest question with me. How did you... This wasn't going to be a fluff piece of interview. This is Newsnight with Emily Maitlis. It's not going to be easy questioning.
No.
So how you didn't go into that... I mean, maybe he was as prepared as he maybe he was incredibly prepared. We don't really know what the process was, but it didn't seem like he was.
No.
Or it didn't seem like he kind of understood the stakes of the situation.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary to me.
To go back to what you said about news as entertainment, has it changed the way you now watch the news? And are you a news junkie? Were you a sort of Newsnight?
I'm a massive news junkie, and I listen to, read too much and listen to too much. And yeah, I think it does. It made me understand the sort of ecosystem of journalists and politicians, and they're all tied. You don't quite understand as a consumer of that how much they're all in cahoots with each other, and how much is negotiated, and it's a give and take thing, so you don't quite understand that.
Yes.
When you're consuming it, and it did make me think actually there's a sort of ruthlessness to it, and from every department. And I thought that's quite interesting. It doesn't make me stop reading the news or listening to it, but I think I do feel like it's become the biggest form of entertainment. I actually think, more than anything else. I mean, and now it used to be one thing that was quite hard talking to Emily was it was very hard to get an opinion out of her because she'd been trained in impartiality and,
of course,
and actually she would always answer with a question.
Yes.
And but now everyone wants opinions.
Yes.
We're listening to all these podcasts and it's all opinions.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The facts and the just straight up story are not so interesting to people. They want opinions and they want entertainment. They want provocation. So it's what we're wanting to consume.
Yes.
There's much more news and features in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. The Standard podcast is back on Thursday at 4 p.m.